So this presentation I've structured deliberately into two stages. The first is going to talk about what third-party cyber attacks are and how to manage the risk associated with it. And the second is specific to ransomware. When you have come to know about your supplier being breached with a ransomware, what you should be doing. So I'll just begin with that. So what exactly does a third-party attack mean in its most basic definition? Would anyone like to start with that? No? Okay, all right. A third-party attack is when a very close supplier with which you work with has been affected, and it is anticipated that you would be the next in the chain in that aspect. The reason being that your supplier, because they work so closely with you, has some kind of information on you, which can be used to launch an attack on it. It could be an access to your extranet, which they were regularly using, or it could be your personnel, which were dealing with the supplier itself. So whatever information they had, or whatever information the supplier had on your organization has now gone into the hands of the attacker. Yes, normally when an organization gets breached, you do get a report from your supplier stating, okay, this has happened and this has been affected. But many times in the short term, the affected party does not know how bad the situation is. And our situation as our organization, we need to be a little bit more proactive and a bit more skeptical than what you hear from it. So the best assumption, the most prudent one, is presume everything the supplier had on you is lost. So now that you have understood that there is loss, how do you proceed with it? You need to understand the potential targets and then start scaling up defenses there. So yeah. The first thing which you do as a data flow assessment is you analyze your relationship with them and you reassess with it. Broadly speaking, they could be having access to two things. One, either your assets, it could be a system, or it could be the personnel involved in it. If it's an asset, what exactly was made available to them? Because that access is completely lost. It could be that the attacker is already in your system, and if you have to identify them, it's on that technical asset. Second, if it is not a system or if it's a personnel, who was working with them, because any information they have, it could be anything which they may have told the affected supplier. It could be just anything as simple as their usernames, passwords, details, or anything on those lines. All that would also go into their hands, and that can be used as social engineering attack, which we all know how successful it is these days. So you have identified the risk, that it's either your system or a person. How do you investigate forward? Does anyone have any ideas they would like to share?
I assume there would be some sort of incident response plan that you'd put into effect. So you probably want to try and quarantine the various assets or potentially personas that have been used, and then try and get some sort of digital forensic investigation involved, just as a guess.
Yeah, that's a very good suggestion, but that's for systems. How would you react if it was if you identified a persona, let's say, because many organizations would have a supplier manager associated with it? How would you deal with that?
Would you perhaps try and instigate some sort of audit, maybe, of all of the personas that are currently in use or access to your system, and essentially try and check off what sort of state of security that they're in?
Perfect. Yeah, that indeed is the case. So as you mentioned previously, the first thing you'd do is you'd look at a SIEM, which is like a security incident event manager, if the organization is using it, which is like a centralized database where all the events of your organization are being collected, so that the SOC analyst has a unified picture of what's happening. So you'll get a timeline of when the organization knew it got attacked from your supplier. You try to correlate whatever happened on your system associated with that supplier on your SIEM. Has it raised any alerts? Triage and try to find out what actionable intelligence it is. It could be the case you saw some additional brute force attempts on your supplier account coming into it. So that is your first evidence that when the organization in question got hacked, you also experience a cyber attack. It could be a failed one. It could be that nothing got breached in the end, but somebody was trying to hit your system. So that's one. The second is, if you have identified it, then you go and try to scale up your defenses as the playbook, which you mentioned before. You try to have multi-factor authentication enabled because you know that the password has been stolen. You can change that, but I'd suggest you'd also go for a high level of protection, in this case, multi-factor authentication. If it is a personnel, then again, as you mentioned correctly, Philip, you identify the employee associated with that, and you have to go and explain to them that, okay, this has happened with your supplier, so you need to be very careful of what comms come from it. It could be an email, it could be anything, and anything that's coming from their side. And you'll have to explain to them what's abnormal behavior. Like a few examples would be that a supplier normally sends everything in a PDF file, and suddenly now they are sending in an attachment that you don't recognize. It could be that that's their way of propagating malware. This would look that, oh, it's very simple to defend, but actually the element of trust between a supplier manager and the supplier they're dealing with is sometimes so high that they do not care about it. And a supplier manager cannot be expected to be an absolute security analyst and know everything. So you need to support them in that way by explaining them basic stuff that, okay, if anything looks suspicious, just send it to us. Or the second example which they get is, okay, we have, after the breach, we have switched to another software, and you need to use that file in order to download it. If you get some kind of comms, which is the second example that I've highlighted on the slide, that is also abnormal behavior. Unless you have got explicit instructions to allow it, you shouldn't. So that's the exploitation of trust. Just two examples, there could be many of those. Now, coming to ransomware, how exactly does it spread? Well, there are multiple ways, but broadly can be divided into three. One's malicious files itself. It could come through just by USB drive or an email attachment. Second is web links, where web links is one of the effective methods in social engineering because it doesn't involve sending the actual malicious payload itself. You just send a link, which is the first stop, and then the malicious file would be 10 hops away from it. And the third is exploiting the vulnerabilities where no human involvement is present in it. So as you can see, the first and second is targeting the human, and the third one is targeting the very system itself. If it has to come through files, what exactly do you do? A large number of organizations use Office 365 Suite and Exchange Online. So I've deliberately taken the first example there. Speaking from my experience with Exchange Online, it allows you to have a stricter domain-specific policies if you wanted to. I know it's not practical to set it up right from the beginning. So if you have identified that, okay, your supplier, ABC, has been hacked, then you will create a policy specific to that supplier, and it will be much stricter. You'll also want to scan any messages that come out of it, block any attachment types which you just don't want, like an exe file or the kind of things that you simply don't use with that supplier. Just block it proactively without needing it. And the fourth one, if you have that feature, is to enable heuristic scannings, because you may get some kind of malware which is not known. The days of signature detection are gone. So every single malware is unique. It's just like a virus. You need to isolate it, otherwise it will spread rapidly. Any other options anyone has besides these four?
Yeah, Zaran, you've mentioned there about blocking the attachment types, but a lot of ransomware gets actually deployed from legitimate files like Excel files with that want you to enable a macro. Now, an Excel file would be a file extension that surely that an organization would allow to come through. Yeah, so it's like, so again, it's trying to get your employees to understand that if something's asking you to go and enable something to edit it or that, please don't.
Yeah, that's what I touched on before, that first you need to understand what is the normal behavior. If the supplier is regularly sending, let's say if they're, for example, they're a paper supplier, they're sending their invoices in PDF file, suddenly they start to come in Excel and the macro enabled files, which is quite problematic. That would be suspicious. So what you would do is you'd create a domain-specific policy to block the macro files for it, while for the rest of the organization it's open and they can use it as they want. Because here you're presuming that this person specifically is going to get attacked. And if it comes as an Excel macro, then it's a problem. And Excel macro is not being used. If it is being used, then the risk of malware coming out of it is addressed in the fourth point, where you enable heuristic scanning. Most of the EDR systems do have these. So yes, Excel macro is a problem. We need to allow it because that's their norm. Then we have a second layer of protection. But if we can avoid it in the first place, why put pressure on the second option? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's perfect. Thank you very much indeed.
No problem.
Could I just ask, would there be any, would it be worthwhile looking at your DMARC policy as well and trying to, or if it's enabled, trying to enable some sort of DMARC policy? Because obviously the follow-on potentially might be, as you mentioned earlier, sort of social engineering attacks, and that might be using a spoof domain from your suppliers. I just wonder if that's something that you would actually sort of bring in at this stage or potentially later.
Indeed, that's a very good point, because what DMARC does is it periodically gets you a report of who's trying to spoof you and who's trying to impersonate you. So if you can find out any correlating attempts, as going back to the point in SIEM, of course, this is outside of it though, but during that investigation, you can, yes, look into DMARC reports and try to see if somebody has tried to impersonate your supplier or yourself, as a matter of fact. If it's the supplier getting impersonated, then, and if they have enabled their DMARC records, then they should be able to inform that, yes, there was few impersonation attempts of our domain, and you should check for any email traffic that has come during these impersonation periods. So yes, DMARC is also a good tool. Anything else? No? Okay, I'll move to the next one. So the next one is malicious web links. Web links became, when email security had good malware protection right at the gateway itself, attackers shifted their method and decided to switch to web links, because what they do is web link can be something of a good reputed website. You can create a Azure tenant these days for free, and you just use the simple server as the first hop of it. So what I have seen in my experience is the first web link, you can put it on VirusTotal, you can do all kinds of domain reputation checks. It'll always 9 out of 10 times turn up clean, which is exactly why it makes into your estate. Because if it is not clean, it never arrives, especially if you're using O365 or any other advanced solutions, email security solutions that actively look into it. There is a feature called as safe links, and O365 is just one of them. There are many of these who will look at the link, analyze the hop, see what the final destination is. Only if the final destination is clear does it allow you to get past, or does it allow the link to be sent to the intended recipient. In this case, you should have that enabled for that affected domain. Not trusting any of the link, because the link could be there, okay, this is my supplier's website, but that's just the first hop, maybe because the supplier's server got breached. So it can be used for further propagation. Second layer of protection would be to have deep SSL inspection enabled. The problem with links is links and the traffic sometimes associated with it is if it's using HTTPS, it's encrypted. If you have SSL inspection and if there is a web payload coming in, you might be able to see that too. And independent web proxy service is just to keep a logs of the kind of websites which are being accessed per endpoint. It could be through your EDR tool also, like Defender EDR has inbuilt web proxy, or you can have an independent proxy like Zscaler deployed on the solution. And third is the one which has zero human interaction and was famously used by the NotPetya ransomware, which is blindly exploiting vulnerabilities in systems. So you go around, and what NotPetya did was, it was just a bot. It went around, searched. Does anybody here know Shodan, or what the Shodan search engine does? No?
Yes, it looks for essentially vulnerable. Sorry, it essentially scans for vulnerable IoT devices and looks at some of the open ports that are available in it, and can give you a pretty good idea of just essentially how vulnerable that system and potentially its patch state is.
Yeah, that's correct. So it's basically one giant spider which is crawling over the net, indexing systems as it comes by. It indexes the system, looks at the version, and then does a correlation of any vulnerabilities, basically giving a hacker a ready-made database of which servers are vulnerable to vulnerability ABC, whatever it is. That's what NotPetya did. It went around looking for a certain vulnerability, If it was exploitable, it would put its malware and jump. It was one of the fastest spreading malwares. No, none of the points which I explained before are even applicable to it because humans were not even targeted in the first place. So you must look into your system. Is it running any unpatched vulnerability, especially with the high CVSS rating or something which is easily exploitable on your external facing estate? If it is, prepone that maintenance and do it quickly. Last one is just incident response, some specific tips for third-party attacks. Again, if you have a system associated with it, then try to list out all the network mediums. So to make it very simple, I'll say if there are like 10 servers and you have like one server dedicated to your supplier comms, that one should have all your attention for some time. You must try to investigate any kind of activity that has happened, even if there are not explicit alerts. From that, you have established, okay, this is the baseline behavior when things were okay. If you must look for any deviations outside of it, has there been any persistent attempt to get into your system after that? So that would be a deviation from the baseline behavior in that time. And hopefully know that your supplier does not have any direct logical connections directly to your infrastructure. Like you wouldn't want them directly authenticating on your domain controller through the ADFS, right? You'd want to federate that domain. So, and something like shadow IT as well. If the supplier is based in your very organization itself, let's say, for example, you have given them some space to operate and they are bringing in their own devices, which are not part of the organization policy, that would be shadow IT. And if possible, have a microsegmented network, because eventually, if an infection happens, you can just cut that part of the network, isolate it from the rest of the good part of the network, and contain the situation as quickly as possible. Any questions?
Just one in relation to essentially API calls and essentially some of the web services that would be available potentially through third parties, sorry, linking into your API gateway and then obviously your servers. I just wondered if there are any instances or if there are any examples where you've seen that actually sort of take place, and what tips are sort of relevant for that.
Yeah, I think API would be going into a little bit of detail here. That's why in the last slide I mentioned network mediums. It's just one of those communication mediums you have with your estate. So yes, that would be a very good part of it, because many times the APIs and the keys are not stored very well by the supplier when they have established connection to your estate. If those keys are stolen, you're effectively given the attacker a superhighway into your system through that. So yes, that is a very good point which you would monitor in that first point when you start to list out all the mediums which are connecting you to your estate. API is definitely one of them. Anything else?
If there aren't any other questions, I'll just, if I could follow on just from your last point on APIs.
Yeah.
Something that, and this is rather selfish because I'm doing a dissertation project on it at the moment, but when, for example, you have something like a council, some sort of public institutional body, and obviously they're using web-based APIs or REST APIs to basically conduct quite a lot of their work. I'm just wondering what kind of mitigations can they potentially put in place to try and basically stop ransomware proliferating through, because it's still not, it's perhaps not necessarily obvious, I guess, to most of the security teams exactly how ransomware would propagate through an API call, for example. Yeah, it'd just be useful to know if there's any specific tips that you've sort of come across that might actually be worth sort of passing on.
I wouldn't say that there's a direct connection of a ransomware attack to an API, but what I would suggest is you look at the API itself. Okay, if you believe that API has been breached, the first thing you do is change the secret key, which allows the API connection to follow. You do take that mitigation from your side, even if the supplier says that no, that part of the RFR estate was not affected or the API key was not stolen. The first thing you do is you try to you change all the secret keys associated with that, which would have allowed access to it. So yeah, it depends again what the API is for. I mean, I understand I understand this is for a specific project that you may be doing, but I need to have a closer look as to what exactly does the API do, what exactly is the risk associated with it, where exactly it's connected, and then accordingly I would plan out the mitigatory actions.
No, that's clear. I think it's probably, as you suggested, a longer conversation, and I think I might try and get in touch with you offline to potentially sort of explore that. But I'm very grateful for your points. Thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions, or at least if you want a little bit extra explanation, because we have some students who are also transferring to cybersecurity. So if there's anything that you need clarification and go backward, and please don't hesitate to ask, because we have a very wide, diverse audience. So it's a learning thing for everybody here. So please don't be shy to ask questions, please. Okay, there's some secure desktop with no camera. Okay, would you like to type your question? Yes, there's a question. So this suggests Zaran, do you?
Yeah, I can say that last
okay.
question. Yeah, it suggests that dealing with the third-party breach from your company perspective. Is there an allowance or advice for collaborating with the breached third-party security team? Well, that's the very first thing you would do, is collaborate with them and ask them to be very honest. What exactly has happened? You'd be surprised to know many organizations are not, unless you pressurize them to tell you. So your collaboration would be identify again that data flow assessment is the first step of the collaboration. You try to verify every single amount of information they had on you, and try to help them. Maybe if you have the bandwidth, most security teams don't, but if you do, you try to help them mitigate that by telling them, okay, you obviously want your relation with the supplier to continue. You're not going to snap it just because they have had a cyber attack. So the biggest help which you can do from your side is help them revoke those credentials quickly, assign them new accounts if possible. That's the proactiveness that will help you keep your business running, because invariably you will get a lot of pressure from the operational teams to keep things running. You can't just cut the network loose and think, there you go, my risk of cyber risk has been mitigated. So that's the first thing you do.
Are you happy with that answer, Simon? Would you like to type your response?
I think he has. It's just a thank
you. Yeah, okay, thank you. Anybody else want to ask a question from the talk? Yeah, there's another question from Philip. The talk seems to have focused on tier 1 supply breaches. Is there any different device where tier 2 or 3 supply is involved?
Broadly speaking, nope. I'd say you take the same approach, but then you would focus on the supplier and their function within your organization to have your deviations from what I have stated. So this is, I think, where you start. I'm just initiating the topic. This is how you should be starting any of these investigations. And then it will always differ on a case-by-case basis. I'd like to highlight that less standardized, sometimes the process is the better. You need to be flexible, because there's one concept which I learned during my uni days, and Deepthi would know about this, is when you're faced with an attack, you are best reliant on your instincts. You automatically do that. Yes, there are playbooks and incident response playbooks, but in the heat of the moment, you will think of it on a case-by-case basis and make the decision there itself. So again, just answering that question, start with the same approach as you would have if they are tier 1, and then depending on the kind of exposure, you try to adapt to it. Maybe you don't need to do that kind of a detailed investigation if they're not very closely associated to that. That's when your tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 would come. There's another question about what exactly is tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers are. I think they are just the levels with which they are associated with your organization. Some are very close to you, like you are giving them direct access to your estate. Some are not, some are a bit far away, or some are not very closely associated with it.
I was just going to just say, yeah, that was my question. A tier 1 supplier would be your direct supply. So you're the acquirer, or you're the business or whatever, and your supplier is the person you're getting products directly from. But they, that supplier will have their own supplier, which will be your tier 2 supplier, and that supplier will have their own suppliers, which will be tier 3. And that's pretty much the way I look at it.
I think Solarigate would be a good example for what happens when a multi-tiered supplier gets breached. Basically every 3 tier. For some unlucky organizations, it was all 3 tiers. Yes, I can share the slides. I think this whole presentation will get uploaded. So I'd suggest you watch the presentation with the slides itself there. The slides are more like a pointer for me, to be fair.
Yes, the talk will be is recorded and shared in the. I think you will get an email from the administrators after the event where to find the.
Another question, what is your assessment of recent JBS breach and the response in the US? It's too new of an event which has happened. So I'll need a bit more time to understand it. And I think in such circumstances, it's best to wait and watch, because what happens is you can take the Colonial Pipeline for an example of how quickly the organization changed its stance and said, nope, this was not an intern fault. This was something else, which is why I'm not very reliant on the first reports that I see whenever a breach comes in, because it's all speculation. It's nothing decided yet.
Zaran, it's Duncan here. The JBS breach has been attributed now to the Revil ransomware group.
Yeah.
In Russia.
State actors. Yeah. Against state actors. Yeah.
Yeah. And their usual approach, from what I gathered from the research I do, is generally through vulnerabilities. So
something like NotPetya, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah. It's something like that. So my question is, and it's probably might be a difficult one to answer, but when we get these vulnerabilities exposed, and you only have to look at the recent things with the Excellion and the file transfer protocol that they had there, and also we've had the SolarWinds and even the Microsoft Exchange. People who haven't actually been hit by ransomware at this particular moment, but they know that these ransomware outfits are actually targeting them from vulnerabilities. What advice do you give to those people who, if they know there's a vulnerability and suddenly go, right, we need to patch our systems, but they could be actually patching the systems and actually locking the malware that they don't even know even exists on their systems inside their networks?
Well, from my limited experience of malware exploitation, that's something I have studied in slight detail, is the moment you patch the vulnerability, the very function, the vulnerable function it was relying on gets kicked out, unless it has developed some kind of persistence payload on it. So if the attacker is already in there and you have patched the system later, which I think is what your question is, then you have a different problem. This is not linked to it. You already have the ransomware on your system. And this becomes a little bit, I would say it's one stage ahead of the supplier risk if you have not done it. So I don't think that would be linked to this.
All right, thank you.
No problem.
We can perhaps move to the next session about Zaran's career. So I will ask, do many cyber criminals get caught? Helen asks.
Well, if you take the example of JBS and the fact that it is being attributed to Russian state actors, my answer is no, because these are state actors. That is obviously not much known about it for all the obvious reasons, but they are very, very well guarded. and very secure in their operations as well. I don't think it's that simple to just send cops to somebody's house in those
We
aspects.
are trying very hard, Helen. You can be one of those who catch them. Thank you.
Yeah, but I'd
So-
like to highlight for non-state actors, simple criminals like credit card skimmers, the numbers are rising of the people getting caught. The best example I can give is when TalkTalk was also hacked. Those hackers have been caught. So disorganized hackers, yes, they do get caught. There is enough apparatus with the law enforcement agencies to do that. So only the state actors which are in the gray. There's nothing we can do about it.
Zaran, if I could, sorry, if I could ask one last question, which is just given the direction that ransomware appears to be going, because before I believe it was only really targeted at individual users, you know, your laptop getting locked and someone trying to extort money from you. It's now going across very large organizations, and you now have double extortion where they're not just locking up the data, but they're actually trying to leak it in order to pressure payment. And I was just wondering, do you think that this should be forcing a bit of a rethink in terms of how we defend our network? So, for example, potentially using cyber deception much more as part of the actual defense in depth. You know, if so, do you think automation is making is going to make ransomware much more common, and would you know, would this be a viable way of actually sort of addressing that? Sorry, I've mixed up the question slightly, but I hope you got the gist.
Yeah, no, I get it. But you are at the last stage of ransomware, that the attack has happened, your system's been taken over. What exactly do you do now? Yes, some attackers have been quite nasty. So they have been, as you rightly mentioned, they are doing double extortion by taking out the data, not just from the system, but also uploading it and putting it on the main system of theirs and just exposing it to all. I wouldn't say that there is a major change, but yeah, cyber deception is one key topic which would help. And as you rightly, that topic is quite close to my heart as well, because I worked on it when I was at uni. It depends again, what exactly did they end up breaching? If they breached a honeypot and took all the data off it, then yeah, cyber deception has done its job. But yeah, there needs to be a very successful deception strategy in place in order for that to be successful. But other than that, I wouldn't be bothered about the final actions of what the ransomware is doing. I just don't want it on the system. I'd channelize all my resources on that.
Thank you. That's clear. Thank you.
So thank you. So yeah, so we are going back to yes, Helen, some people pay up.
Colonial Pipeline people paid up $5 million, I think.
That went on to,
wrong.
but some people secretly pay as well. So Zaran, Zaran was a student at Hertfordshire University, where I happened to teach him as well in one module. So that's how I met Zaran a few years ago. Not long ago, no, Zaran, it was 2018. You graduated in 2019. Yeah. Yes, and also Zaran is an international student, so I'm very happy to introduce him as securing a good job and doing really well, and then came and showed you what you have learned, what you're doing in your work. So I want you to share the people who will benefit from what your career path, how you started, getting interested in this area of work, and then yeah.
Okay. So just before I begin talking about myself, I'll give a few pointers, because I've prepared a slide just for that reason. Is security is a very diverse subject, contrary to popular belief. It's not just one domain within IT. It's like it has a lots of domains, even within security itself. It could be anything ranging from red team pen testing, which is ethical hacking and breaking things just to find out if they can be broken, or just secure things to ensure that they never get broken. So this point number 2 and 3 is a big misconception people have, and that is you need to be very technical No, you don't need to be. I have seen people, lawyers, get into cybersecurity. I work even with some of them in my current job. So you don't have to be very technical. And if you're low on technicalities, it's fine. You always have, everyone has, I would say, a pathway into security. You just need to find out what suits you best. The third one is even a bigger misconception. You need to know programming, not necessarily. Programming or some kind of shell scripting skills would be useful, but they are not absolutely essential. You would be surprised to believe if you go and watch any ethical hacking videos on YouTube. Also, there is one very good uploader called IPSec. His hacking videos are like an hour long. He's all into ethical hacking and everything. He's constantly Googling stuff and learning things on the fly. You simply cannot and never will know everything every time at every moment. So be prepared to learn everything. In my case, no 2 days are absolutely the same for me. I'm learning something every day, and that's the beauty of security. Then in order to succeed in it, you'll need to find out what exactly suits you. Don't just say that, okay, this is the new thing which has come in and I'm going to stick by it because that is going to get me my dream job or something like that. Find it, find what you want to do in security. So I started as ethical hacking, but now I'm doing cyber risk management. So in short, I was in the red team. I was learning how to break things, and now I'm translating that knowledge into how to ensure that the things don't get broken by somebody else. So you may start somewhere, but you'll end somewhere else totally. It's perfectly fine. It's perfectly normal. Don't feel bad about it if that ever happens to you. And the last point is just general. Be very passionate about what you do, because if you're very passionate about what you're doing, your Mondays will be more exciting than your weekends. I speak for myself in that aspect. This is how I'd say these are some of the pointers which I followed in my mind when getting into security. My interest in security started by being just very, basically obsessed with ethical hacking and how things get broken. And just the fact that I remember having my own red-colored Dell Inspiron laptop and breaking my own computer by going through another one and creating a malware there. It sounds very simple, but I think this was a couple of years back in 2017 or so when I started this. And I was in it completely. And I started researching and spending so much amount of time. So yeah, you just need to find something that you really like and stick by it, and everything will start to work for yourself. So that's how I did it. Then I got my certified ethical hacker certification. It was a good stepping stone into the industry. It's slightly well recognized than other certifications. Yes, it's slightly basic as compared to the advanced stages you would be in your career, but I'd suggest that is one certification you should aim for just to get into it. And then I quickly decided I want to get a master's degree because I wanted this academic experience and an overall view of what options are available within security itself. So when I was at uni, I learned everything from compliance, something like GDPR, to a pen testing module itself. That diverse exposure then gave me an idea, okay, this is what I want to do now going forward. And that's how I ended up in TSB in my current role.
Right, thank you very much. Are there any questions for Zaran around his career? Any advice you need? Or from anybody, actually. I can see there are other established security people here, professionals here.
Philip was saying something, I guess.
Sorry, Zaran, I was trying to type the question in chat, but apologies, it's a very bad habit of mine to just jump in. I was just wondering if you had any mentorship along the way, or if or once you actually joined TSB, and is mentorship something that you see as important to developing your career?
Depends, I'd say. I would say, as Deepthi said, I'm an international student. So when I came here, I was pretty much by myself in this aspect. So if you have a mentor who understands your line of work and who also knows your own abilities, maybe they have been very close to you. If it could be a relative or it could be anyone, then yeah, I think mentorship would help. In my case, I think I got the general unconditional support from my parents too. That basically gave me the idea, okay, they are supporting me because I'm from India, and it's no easy to just change countries and start a master's course like that. So if by mentorship you'd say support, general support from your parents, then yes, that played a very big part in my success as well. But regarding specific career decisions or doing anything very technical within security itself, for that I was more reliant on my professors for general guidance. But in the end of the day, it was my decision and my own calculations which made me go down a certain path. It's a bit of psychological also. If you're afraid of whether you want to choose your passion or not, I think your family is the best support you can get, because they will always support you unconditionally. But if you want some technical advice, then I think forums like these would be something I used to look forward to when I was a student. But make your own decisions. That's more important. Don't follow anything blindly.
Because I know Zaran, I can also say that Zaran was a very active student, and he asked questions. Everybody knew him by his name. So I think that makes a difference as well. There was another question, Zaran. How do you get hands-on experience as a student?
Experience as a student, well, I'd suggest you, if depends on what kind of experience you want. If it is academic experience, then I'd suggest you absolutely spend each and every minute of your time in uni in researching. The more you read, the more you research, the better prepared you are. And second is, when you research something and find something interesting, try to recreate it. Like if you read about a new hacking technique, try to have like your own sandboxed environment. It's very easy to set up these days. You can have your own little hacking environment and try everything you want. Contrary to popular belief, hacking as an activity done on your own device is not exactly illegal. If you do something on somebody else's devices without their permission, that's what constitutes as criminality. So you have your own system. You can set up something and you can test it, but you'll need that level of enthusiasm to keep trying, because if you're getting into ethical hacking, it's never going to succeed at the first attempt. So yeah, tinkering, I used to tinker a lot with my device, and yeah, that helped me a lot.
I can see there's a lot of conversations going on, people helping
Yeah.
each other. Okay, that's good.
I'm
Some
glad it's been
networking
used as a
happens.
forum.
Yes,
Yeah,
very good.
very happy about it.
Right. If there's no questions, perhaps those who wants to leave can leave. There's an announcement I want to make. Our next event is happening. I think it's, I just copied it previously. No. For the June talk. Is that the one? Yes. June talk is the link here. Link is here for the June talk. So if you are interested, please please register and join us again in July talk on Friday the 2nd of July from 3 to 4. Actually, they have made a mistake about 5. I'll advertise it. Thank you very much. Oh, what happened?
I just ended my.
All
I
right.
stopped sharing my screen. If that's
yes.
okay.
So if there are any other questions, you can ask. If you have also, if anybody or any one of you like to give us a talk, so please be in touch with us. And if you have any other recommendations, please get in touch with us. And also, if you have any other questions, please send us to us. Get in touch with Zaran, or I'm sure the other guests also will be happy to help. If some people I saw offering help. Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time, spending your time for my presentation.
Around until 5 o'clock if you want to stay back and ask a question also. Thank you very much. Have a lovely Friday and a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.